preservation of human life,
would you like to come and join?
and that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. We also have a value taught us in the Torah, tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. We don't just try to be just, we try to pursue justice. And we must pursue justice for George Floyd and for all those who are unjustly treated. But for all those who are enduring unnecessary pain and suffering, communities of color across the country who are wondering how many times do they have to watch this, we say to them they are not alone, and we are with them. And we, our congregation Shari Shemayim in Atlanta, is uniquely suited to give expression to what's happened through our values, because we are such a diverse congregation. I have asked David Revel to be our host of sorts through a panel discussion. And first, so I'm going to give the floor to David, and I will try my best to manage as host, technical host, this Zoom program, which I have to admit, I'm technically challenged dealing with. So forgive me in advance if there are any problems. David, go on. Well, I also want to say to all of you, if side noise becomes an issue because someone's dog is barking or the TV is being played too loud, we can pick up sounds from wherever. I will have to mute everybody except for the ones who are speaking. Okay, David, take it away.
Shalom kulam, shalom alaikum.
Alaikum shalom.
Alaikum shalom.
I want to first explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a moment and speak. And after I take a moment and speak, I'm going to ask, after I speak, I'm going to address or may address, our first speaker will be Rabbi Fune. And after Rabbi Fune, I might come back to myself slightly and then go to Rabbi Yehuda ben Moshe. From that point, I would like us to have a dialogue, respect each other, and maybe have questions. If you have a question, because we can't all speak at the same time, you know, I'll call out myself or Rabbi Kunis will call out. But I want us, before we start, to understand that we are all family. Regardless of where we come from, regardless of our color, we are united because we were most likely all those souls sitting at Sinai, standing, called back together in this day. We're united by a worship unto the Creator. We're united by the Torah. We're united by love for Israel. And we're united by love for the Jewish people. Last week, I'm going to be honest with you. When I saw the news and my family were trying to show me the video of the officer and George Floyd, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see it because I was afraid. I was afraid about what I would see. I was afraid about seeing the same thing over again. I didn't want to get bothered in the turning around of who did what and who was guilty and whether he deserved it or whether the cops were. I got so numbed. And then one of my children asked me what was wrong. And I realized that I did something wrong. I turned myself off. I got so bothered by seeing things that it got to the point where it didn't affect me. I became desensitized. So as I sat down and saw it again, I was angry. I was confused and I was disappointed because I heard a man who was my senior in age cry out to his mother to save him. A grown man. And I was also upset because people stood around and did not do anything but scream or speak loud. And for about 8 minutes, you watch the video, I think 8 minutes, 43 seconds, he passed, he died. He was murdered.
Not everybody.
I can't say he was killed. It would not be right for me to say that. I have to say in the absolute, he was murdered. Now, when I think about it, a whole week later, everything went crazy. There's protests, riots, people upset. Fox News saying one thing, CNN saying one thing, CBS saying one thing. Two different reports about how he died. Discussion about his life. What was his system? The attendance. Why? Too much division. How did we come to society?
He's echoing. You're echoing now. All of a sudden, he started echoing. Somebody is, we got some feedback.
All right, I'll mute everybody except him. One second. I lost him for 1 second. I can't find him. Okay, I can unmute you. Okay, Dawid, continue.
Am I echoing now?
No.
How do we get as a society today, we're actually divided on someone who died on camera, live. They couldn't breathe. How far have we gotten to where we can't even come together, unified in spirit and mind, about what actually went on? I know that all of us are very different. We have different backgrounds. We may have different opinions, but the one thing we cannot be different about is our understanding of the Torah and what the Torah says. When I read the book of Leviticus, it says, Lotelek Rakil, this is Leviticus 19:16. Lotelek Rakil Ba'am Mekah Lo Tamod Al Dam Reka Ani Hashem. It's very clear we're not to go about as talebearers among our people. Nor should we stand, should we take a stand against the life of your neighbor. We have to remember as Jews what we have gone through for millenniums. We were the ones hunted down. We were the ones who were chased from Egypt, from the Philistines in the land, from the Syrian nation, from Babylon, from Greece, from the terrible and dreadful Roman Empire. Our temple was destroyed, and we were scattered all over the world, north, south, east, and west. And the very country we went in, we were oppressed for being who we were. We are a light. We should understand what oppression is. We should understand what bias is, racism, hatred. And I believe it's our mandate to be a light to the whole world. So we can unite, if we can have a sensible conversation and come together, the Akkad, on a reasonable platform, maybe we can change the world and bring on the coming age. With that being said, I'd like to pass the floor to Rabbi Fune, who is calling in and zooming in from Chicago. Rabbi Fune, I'll give you 5 minutes. If you need a little longer, it's fine. The floor is yours.
Shalom, shalom. And I need to simply say, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. The people of Israel live. We have seen in this past week and months and years, devastating activity on the part of those who have sworn to protect us. And as an African-American Jew with 2 sons and 9 grandsons, I feel every time they leave our home here in Chicago, and when they are in the midst of just in the community going to the store, doing whatever they're doing. This country has had a storied history of racism that dates back, we're at the turn of the century now, where I remember the bloody summer of 1919. I remember through reading it, I'm not that old, about the history of what happened in Chicago, what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, what happened in other Rosewood, Florida, and these are just but a few examples. As an individual that is recently turned 68 years old, I've lived through the torment of police abusing the rights of individuals who were of a different ethnicity, simply because they were of a different ethnicity. I am so glad that this conversation is taking place, because it reminds me of a small piece that I read from Elie Wiesel, and in his book, Night. And it talked about, if we don't in fact speak up for each other, who will be there to speak up for us when they come for us? And there is no other community outside of our brothers and sisters in the Ashkenazi community, the Sephardi community, who really have an understanding of what this means to be able to speak up. For many years, I've served as a member of the board of a Jewish organization, the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs here in Chicago, Illinois, that sought to work against anti-Semitism, against racism, against oppression of any and all people, whatever their ethnicity. And I'm proud to say that, having served on that board for well over 20 years, that our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community here in Chicago, and I'm certain around the Atlanta metropolitan area as well, came to the forefront. I never will forget when I was in Washington, D.C., we were doing a film about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and his speech in Washington, D.C. at the mall. And there was a gentleman that was there, and he said, "Rabbi, let me tell you something. For all of the thousands and thousands of people that were here on that day to hear Dr. King speak, that came from every corner of this country, every 3 or 4 persons that were in that crowd that were supporting Dr. King were Jews." And I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "No, no. The Jewish community in your city," I believe it was the Temple Synagogue that was bombed for being supporters of Dr. King's work. And they came to the fore. So I believe strongly that as a Jew and as a person of African descent in America, I'm going to speak up for you. And I pray and I'm glad that our Jewish community, the Ashkenazi community, has chimed in and spoken up on behalf. I've seen letters of condemnation for the actions in Minnesota from across the board, from every major Jewish organization. And although people get mixed up about the violence is most of the time done by the individuals that are voiceless. They have no voice. And the only way that they feel that they can express themselves is through acts of destroying things. It's interesting that in Chicago, after the last weekend, individuals in certain neighborhoods destroyed their own grocery stores. They were already living in food deserts. Now they have even further to go to try to get food to feed their families. Our community must be a part, and a critical part, of seeing and saying, we will no longer tolerate racial injustice by any organization. Because if in fact it's the police, then it seems that it gives license, as we've seen so recently, of other individuals calling the police on Black folks for having a picnic, calling the police on Black folk for being in the park. And these are silly things. This country, it is my firm belief, must rise above the pettiness, must rise above the divisiveness that is being spread by so many voices, some in high places, some with an awful lot of power, and some just simply seek to divide as opposed to seeking to unite. So let us be united. Let us be united as Jews. Am Yisrael Chai. The people of Israel live. And we must be there for each other, as well as other communities that we see when they're suffering. Because as Elie Wiesel said, when they came for the Catholics, I wasn't a Catholic, so I said nothing. When they came for this other group, I wasn't a member of that group, so I said nothing. Then they came for me. And you know what? When they came for me, there was no one else around to speak up and speak out on my behalf. So I deeply appreciate this time of sharing, and I want to hear, I want to learn, and to just really absorb and perhaps even have some shared ideas of how we can bring about a greater degree of equity in our country. Because at this point in time, we're not on equal footing, not on equal footing. I'd like to see greater police accountability in the city of Chicago and in other cities around the world where police accountability is lacking. One sure measure of that is perhaps having citizen elected bodies that are non-police related, that can in fact be a part of monitoring and governing what happens in various police departments around this country. And so I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to share with you. And again, I simply want to listen, I want to learn, and to hear the ideas that will come forth, not about what has happened, but about how we can move forward and what is the best path forward. I want to thank you very much, David, and I pray that I wasn't too long.
No, you weren't. Rabbi Funyeh is the chief rabbi of the Israelite Board of Rabbis and is really internationally recognized figure. Dawid, you have any comments?
Rabbi Funay, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time on your busy schedule. And I really appreciate what you said at the end about focusing on what we can do than being caught up and divided by our opinions that are just based upon our emotions and feelings. And moving forward with what unite us. I want to thank you. Before I want to open the floor, but not yet, to any question for Rabbi Funay. We'll come back to you. I want to go to Rabbi Yehuda ben Lewi, Rabbi Yehuda Moshe ben Lewi, and then it was one more person, and then open up for any questions. Rabbi Yehuda, are you there?
I don't see him
I saw him earlier.
on the list.
Yes, he is. Rabbi Yehuda, can you unmute your phone line?
I unmuted everybody. Rabbi Huda.
Unmute your side. He's talking.
You need to unmute, Rav.
Rabbi Huda, can you unmute your side?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you
can.
now. Can you start
Okay.
again? And the
I
floor
can't-
is yours.
I can't find where you are on the
I see him.
participants list. So when I do, I will put you on top of the screen.
I see him. He's on the next page.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So let me begin by thanking everyone for this opportunity. I want to say Shalom Kulam, Shalom Ravaim, Shalom Chavarim, and to echo the elder, Israel Chai. And I want to start off by stating that the whole Floyd situation is actually a culmination of the injustice that we see in America from the institution of racism and white supremacy.
Okay.
So this is much bigger than the young brother, the young man who was murdered senselessly by people who represent the federal or state or municipal government who are supposed to protect us. I see racism as a plague, and I see this as a test that was given to us by Hashem. You see, we're right now in a plague right now, this pandemic with COVID, and we have to deal with that, and we see the effects of how this disease, if it's left unchecked, how it will spread. Here we have a disease that's man-made, a plague that's man-made. And I believe Hashem is testing us. While we're dealing with this COVID, now we have to deal and understand the plague that we've begun in America, what we have as a legacy, something that has been institutionalized. Being a Jew, as many of you understand, is difficult living in America historically as a Jew. Anti-Semitism is high. But when you're a Jew and you're Black, as I always say, that I always identify myself as a blue, it's a double whammy. I remember years ago when I expressed to a colleague of mine that was working in the medical field, the medical field. The doctor says, wow, you have it really difficult. He says, if something happens, who do you call? The Anti-Defamation League, or do you call the NAACP? I said, both. Being stigmatized because of the complexion of my skin. Anyone being stigmatized because of who they are is wrong. And here, being a Jew, we understand the purpose of Tikkun Olam. We understand that Tikkun Olam, as many people would like to put it, is the healing of the world. And actually, in the Sugya, they call it the completion of the world. ridding the world of Avodah Zarah, ridding the world of idolatry. And idolatry, as a matter of fact, the Sigya, the Chachamim, the sages of Israel, said there are 3 sins that cannot be avoided. They cannot be abrogated. You know, you have this concept called nefesh, where you can suspend 610 mitzvot to save a life, but there are 3 that you cannot suspend, and that's murder, that is forbidden relations, and that is idolatry. And I'm speaking to how this began. How did this happen? Why did it wait so long? It's been over hundreds of years. Racism has been institutionalized in America. Why has it lasted so long? Why has this plague been left unchecked? Yes, we may strive, just like Rabbi Fu talked about the civil rights movement. We spoke to it. There have been leaps and bounds, but it hasn't been eradicated. Here we are in the year 2020, and we're faced with the same situations. However, I would like to give a big round of virtual applause to people who rallied and came together for the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a sense of precedence, because even during the civil rights movement, we have support, or I should say sympathy, if not empathy, for the movement. It seems to be more of a sincere effort, and people are tired of it. This new generation has come, and the younger generation seems to understand and are taking up the mantle. But we have a lot of work to do, because this thing is systemic. It's written in the Constitution. It's in the laws of redlining. It is in all 9 areas of human activities, from the economics, education, you just name it. Racism has its tentacles in those areas. We have a long way to go. And since Jews have been called together for Tikkun Olam, or the completion of the world, ridding the world of idolatry, this is the purpose. This is what the prophets have seen. This is why we're told by the prophets, and we say this every Shabbos, by Yom Hahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, right? And that day he shall be one. The realization of Hashem and who he is teaches us moral and ethical behavior, bar none. How to treat our fellow, whether Jew or not Jew. So for the longest time, I think Hashem is testing us at this very point. The plague that he is giving to us, because maybe perhaps some of the things we were slacking, now he's showing us a plague at this point in time that we created, that we have been slacking. And what is it that I suggest that we should do to step up to this mantle? Yeah, I understand teshuvah. I understand, praying. I've heard a lot of rabbis talk about that. I heard a lot of clergymen talk about this. But I believe that in order to stop this, we have to now treat every incident as if it happened to you. And it does have a potential. Like a disease, if you leave it unchecked, with one group of people, some way or another, will find its way to your doorstep. Here's proof.
I think that his camera may have froze. Rabbi Yehuda, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. You can continue.
Okay, I'm going to continue. Here's proof of what I'm saying. I've heard many of my brothers, whether Sephardi or Ashkenazi, who are in their respective areas because of protests, complain about the jewelry stores being looted, the grocery stores being vandalized, arson. These are small cases. And as Rabbi Funi express when people who have no voice become frustrated, they would act in ways to get attention that we will otherwise would get attention. However, this is proof that something's left unchecked, it will come to us. We will be affected by it physically, financially, and otherwise. What I'm calling for is unity. Though we have support of many Jewish communities, we need the Jewish community to stand up and take their position as being the Bikor, the firstborn of Hashem, to exemplify what it is to be a human being. The moral and ethic laws. Yes, we had many Jews who held hands in the civil rights movement, but we need more. This divisive concept, I've heard one person said, we should mind our business. We should go to Eretz Israel and leave it alone. I said, no, if you go to Eretz Israel, we'll follow you there. We all was giving this world by Hashem. This world and planet was created for us. We have the responsibility to work together. And the beautiful thing about being Israel, being the Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, is that we look like everybody on the planet. Everybody on the planet should be able to relate to us. It's a psychological trait and behavior to gravitate towards people who remind you of you. And so having different features, different complexions, coming from different cultural backgrounds, we are in the most and the ultimate, or if you said example of what it is to bring people together, we can do it. But we have to get over our own situation. We're very close, just like it was in 2,000 years ago when the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed because of our own divisiveness, Lashon Hara, and not accepting another Jew because of their differences. But Hashem says, right now on this planet, he's not playing. And he's putting the mantle into our hands, and the ball is in our court. So I would say, as we move forward, just like Rabbi Funeh has brought up, that we have to be proactive. We see on Shabbat, Bara Elokim La'asot, Hashem created the world to be completed. Our job is to complete this beautiful creation and make it a paradise. And just like it said in the book of Zechariah, that day will come if we do our job, that day will come that every person, every man from the nations, 10 men from the nations, so grab a coat of a Yehudi and says, we know that Hashem is with you. Please teach us. We have to step to the plate. We have to do our jobs. We have to let the world know they're our brothers. And just because you're a Jew doesn't mean that you're not a part of them. We taught that in Talmud, that we all come from the same father, Adam. One of us can say, you're a sinner because your father was a sinner, and we're not sinners because our father, no, we come from the same father. We have a duty as being the firstborn of the nations, the firstborn of the Creator, and let's do it. So I think that's what I will close with. I hope that this doesn't fall on deaf ears. I say this with a lot of passion, and if you need me to clarify anything, I will do my best. Please forgive me for any technical difficulties. I'm in the mountains, and therefore, the connection is kind of loose. So please forgive me. And I yield now. Shalom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Yehuda. Before we open the floor, one of the last individuals I like to speak is one of our elders in our congregation. Hoshea, is he there? Hoshea Lewy?
Hosea. Hosea.
I'm muted. I'm here.
Isaiah,
Okay.
we're going to ask that before we open the floor, you being one of our elders in our shul, we thank you for your dedication to the community, your time. If you could take a couple of minutes and speak before we open the floor to any questions to Rabbi Fune, myself, or Rabbi Yehuda, to Rabbi Kunes, yourself, or anyone else, please take the time. Go right ahead.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I give thanks to the creator of the universe, to whom we all have our being. And, you know, the operative word that we've heard here this evening is racism. And racism is a sin and a plague. Racism, unfortunately, is in the fiber or the quilt of America. Unfortunately, this country was built on racism. And when I say that, I'm speaking of, you know, racism from the standpoint of not only African Americans, or should I say Africans that were brought here as slaves, but Jews, European Jews, people who weren't what we would refer to as WAS, were segregated against. And we being the light unto the nations, it is our obligation to understand, or let the world understand, that when they sin, they diminish the light. They diminish the light of the Creator. And the light of the Creator is diminishing in America because we truly have a problem. Racism will destroy this nation. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. We must stand up and be the light unto the nations and let them know and understand that what this is doing to America. As Rabbi Fournier said, we have people in high places throughout this country who are not trying to unite us, but to divide us. And if we allow this to continue to happen without raising our voice, this country is doomed. I'm sorry to say this, but we have to stand up and be the light into the nations and let them know this is what's happening. We read about Jonah going to Nineveh on Yom Kippur. And what we must understand, just like people have to repent, nations have to repent. This country needs to repent and understand that what racism has done to us, it is destroying us. With that, I'll yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Hosea. Before we open up the floor, I'm reminded of when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and Miriam did not think or believe that Moshe Rabbeinu should marry a Cushite woman, whether because she was Cushite or maybe because of the position he was in, whether because there was other Jewish women. The way she went about communicating her displeasure opened the door to evil speech, lashon hara, and against the leader. Israel could not move for 7 days at that time. Miriam was infected with a plague. And during that time, all of Israel could not advance until that time ended. As Oshia said, I believe that we are the cure. Because why? It's prophetic. We are to be a light unto all the nations. They're going to grab onto the corners of our garments. So therefore, we may, within our own communities and our own groups might have a bit of bigotry ourselves, indifference, racism. And we have to acknowledge it. If we can acknowledge it, if we can come and make things right among ourselves with our diversity, with our strength, the connection that Hashem has given us, we're spread all over the world. It's possible. We can make a change the entire world. But it first starts with us. It is our spiritual Magna Carta. This meeting today is very powerful. I thank each and every one of you for coming and for our speakers. At this time, what I'd like to do is open the floor up to anyone who has a question for our speakers or wish to share something. Let us know by raising your hand because there's so many of you, and we'll call out your name. Please be mindful of the time because there's so many of us, but we want to be sensitive to the things that you say and hear you. The floor is open at this time.
May I speak?
Who's that? Announce your name, please.
Lamar.
Lamar, Lamar, you have the floor.
A lot of good points were presented. As I think about this and listen as everyone's speaking, one of the key things we're talking about is the solution. What do we do about this? But we also need to think about the effect, the mental and emotional effect of everything. Daweed, you mentioned, hey, when I saw this video at first, I was angry. I was upset. I shut down. What's key is for us to express these emotions, express how we're feeling about this travesty that occurred. Also, talk about everything that has happened, all of our experiences. We don't talk about our experiences. We don't talk about our emotions. We hold things in and carry them with us, and that continues to affect us, and then we explode. So even now at this point, after this travesty have occurred, watching the video formulates a secondary trauma. So secondary trauma is categorized as hearing about something that's happened, an incident that's happened, or talking to someone that has experienced something traumatic and taking that on. So just watching the news, just hearing about that has affected masses of people to the point to where they're constantly thinking about it. They're constantly having trouble with eating and sleeping, having trouble within their home as far as communication. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of frustration in this country now just from seeing this traumatic event occurring and hearing about it. So we need to talk about these emotions and deal with these emotions and recognize that, yes, there's several layers to these emotions. So there's the immediate trauma that is going on now within the country, but some of us have experienced traumatic situations throughout. So if you've ever been in a situation where you've experienced racism, a lot of times we take that as the norm as African Americans and say, okay, yeah, someone crosses the street when they see me, or they clutch their purse, or they, they look at me, follow me around when I'm in the store. And we say, okay, well, hey, that's just racism. And we may talk about it amongst ourselves, but we don't talk about it amongst everyone else consistently like we should and speak out about it. For those of the Caucasian
Okay.
Rabbi, is it possible to mute Rabbi's line except for Lamar?
as far as those that were raised in situations where there was racism in the home, where they were taught racist ways of believing, they were taught to be separate and separate themselves from other people, those discussions and those emotions need to be talked about as well. There's a level of guilt that they may feel when they're amongst, themselves, or when they're amongst other people and friends. These feelings need to be talked about, and we need to talk about how to make those changes. But first we need to acknowledge how this feels. And we talk about the layers. So we also think about it. There was 400 years of slavery. So after that 400 years of slavery, 50 years, there was, okay, yes, you can do your own thing. You can have this, build this. But then a lot of instances that was taken away. We look at Rosewood when it was burned down, and all the instances where Black people had their own, they were separated and they were doing their own thing, and it was taken down. So now there's also another point that there is not just as far as color separation, but there's also separation versus rich and poor. So you have to think to yourself, what would make people go into broken glass windows and take things out of it and steal from their own people? So there has to be some reason why they feel like there's nothing else that they can do to get these things and these possessions. So we've put possessions ahead of human beings and lives in this community, in this country. So that's another issue that we have to figure out. How do we balance that out? How do we get past those lines as well? So there's a lot that needs to be done, but we need to talk about how we really feel about this, accept those emotions, and how these situations affect us in our homes and outside of our homes, and figure out a better way.
Thank you, Lamar. Rhonda.
Thank you, Lamar.
Rhonda, I think you have to be on mute. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Okay. Thank you. I feel very powerless and impotent. I don't see myself going to protest. What can I do?
Rhonda, who are you asking a question to?
Anybody? Rabbi Fournier, I guess.
Well, I just want to amplify that, okay, if I might.
Sure.
But as I said in my video yesterday, if it wasn't for the issue of social distancing and the problem of violence in some of these demonstrations, I would like to organize a march from Congregation Shar Shemayim to join with the protests and to get the word out there that the Jewish community is solidly behind seeking justice for George Floyd and for everyone, all communities. And I would be proud to wear a T-shirt that says, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." The horror of it. And I'm hoping things will calm down, that we'll be able to do something like that. Anyway, anybody else want to chime in, please?
Well, just the thought, the marching is a great idea. And I mean, I get with the social distancing, but I mean, you could still wear masks, you could still wear gloves, and you can still hold signs, and we can still be separated with an even amount of distance and march. As far as the violence piece of it, it's really overly publicized. The incidents that we're seeing on the news isn't as big as they're being blown up to be. There's a lot of small incidents that are occurring, but I've seen protests even here in Lawrenceville, Georgia, where there's no violence. There's people standing out of all of these public buildings, and they have their signs up, some of them with kids, and there's absolutely no violence going on. These people are standing out there with gloves, with masks, with signs, and they're doing what they need to do to protest. And there's more protests that are being organized downtown Atlanta. Now we have a curfew, but there are people that are doing this on a regular basis now, and they're not having any incidents of violence.
So Lamar, maybe we can get together after this is over, maybe tomorrow, and speak about how we can organize some sort of march for the Jewish community to participate with the Black community.
I'll help with that also, because I was down there yesterday after I left the radio station. He was right. There was no violence downtown at all. My daughter and I was down there, and people of all diverse backgrounds were all there marching.
Okay.
If I could add to the young lady's question, I think that if you don't want to march, I think that you can be effective in contacting elected officials
Right.
and stating to them what your feelings are and the injustices that you have seen and have witnessed. I think that you could write an op-ed piece to your local newspapers. I think that what we all have to do is, as I said to a group yesterday, I think that has everyone done their census forms? Has everyone taken care of that? And is everyone prepared to vote? Is everyone prepared to vote, or do we feel a hopelessness with respect to our vote? Will it count? Yes, it will count. When I've seen charts where the current president won states, and he should not have won those states, but it was due to a lack of voter activity, mainly in the African American community. And so where he may have won a couple of states, 3 or 4 states by 20,000, 25,000 votes, some of those cities in those states had 100,000 Black folks that didn't vote. And so we must encourage voter registration. We must encourage people to vote to make a change. The secondary thing that I would suggest is that when we experience these types of injustices on behalf of law enforcement, let us encourage young people to perhaps examine careers in law enforcement, examine careers in different areas, not only in the medical field, but perhaps serving as firemen, perhaps becoming sheriff's deputies and things of this nature. I think that the involvement must be intertwined, just not in what we say, but we must now think strategically in moving forward. And for me, I've encouraged everyone to make certain that they're registered, make certain that they vote, and let us begin the process of letting the political leadership through our cities and in our states know that we're concerned and know that we're watching what you do. And we need to lay out for them, this is what we want you to do. This is what we want you to say. And then that's doing something. And doing something, because marching is good, marching is fine. But for me, I think it is more important for us to become involved systemically and from the grassroots of things. And that's my opinion.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
The pen is more powerful than a sword.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi Fanay. Does anybody else want to make a comment or have a question?
Yes, I would like to make a comment. I think that we need to take some very specific action, particularly as it relates to the political and governmental institutions. There's been talk about, going back and having community oversight over the police departments and the training and all of that. So what I would like to hear is very specific actions that we can advocate for that could make systemic change, such as community oversight of the police department. Thoughts?
I talked to a gentleman the other day who used to work for the police department, and he said that a lot of it is ingrained. So you have a lot of older police officers that are in there that have these ideas and these thoughts. Also, what has happened is their hiring restrictions are low. So they're just hiring a lot of people, and some of them don't really have much of an education, especially in a lot of rural areas. So they just kind of hired a lot of people and just put them in place, and a lot of them have these, these control issues and have these other patterns. So yes, changing how they hire, their hiring system. And a matter of fact, the individual I'm talking about, he's actually talking to a couple of chief of police and other people about changing the hiring system within the police departments, and also making sure that there's better psychological testing. Also making sure that people have to have a higher level of education when getting positions within the police departments, and just kind of and letting go a lot of those older people that have been in there. It's like, one bad apple spoils the bunch. So they've created a kind of atmosphere that's not effective. So it has to be dismantled and reorganized from within. So if we're talking about the police department, the couple of conversations that I've had.
I would like to add by stating that just to right along what you just said, Brother Lamar, is that training, the cultural training, there should be an oversight for the training of the police department, and that will actually revolutionize the way the police are behaving, because the way they're being trained now is to treat certain citizens as combatants, going against the grade when it comes down to what it means to protect and to serve. Now, there was a video posted a while ago where there were a couple of British police officers in New York City, and it was caught on tape. So you go on YouTube with these British officers. They were off duty. They came to New York for vacation, to tour, and there was an altercation in the subway car. And the way these police officers handled the situation was a complete contrast compared to the way the New York or NYPD would have handled it. And that's one example of the mode of training in a way of understanding you don't have to use brute force. The other thing, when I say cultural, I remember in the medical field, we had a training called, cultural tolerance, where we had to understand behaviors of different people from different backgrounds, breaking down the stereotypes, the different stigmas that were placed on different people. And so that's another thing. And I think and I have a few police officers in my family, all right? I have at least 3 that's, in that are siblings. And what I've learned is that the way they're trained, they're not trained to handle, as Lamar stated so clearly, psychological situations, how to read what's going on with the person they're dealing with. They're not trained to understand the diversity of expressions, and that a lot of these stigmas that they come into, the paradigms that they run into becoming a police officer. And these are African-American police officers who have learned from those captains. They have taken on this behavior that if you want to make it, you can't trust nobody, suspect the worst out of this group of people. If they're in poverty, they're more dangerous than a person who is not in poverty. The ideology that a person you pull over because they're of a certain ethnic makeup, they're most likely from this background, therefore you have to handle them in a certain way, that has to change. So they're painting people with a broad brush, and unfortunately, African-American people, men and women alike, are being murdered because of this falsehood. And this is because of a fear, a racial fear that's being perpetuated in the system. And so if they change that paradigm and understand that they're there, the reason why they carry guns is to protect themselves from people who are trying to shoot them, not to kill people who expect from them some service and assistance.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I would agree, Rabbi Yehuda.
Thank you, Rabbi Yehuda.
Very briefly, this afternoon on CNN, they were calling for police reform nationwide, which is a re-education, a retraining of how police deal and handle situations. Now, I would just like to share with you an example of what I'm speaking of. My son was at Oxford College, which is a 2-year school at Emory, which is just beyond Conyers, Georgia. And him and his friends were in a shopping strip mall, and a few of the friends went to Winn-Dixie to pick up some stuff to munch on. And they said to Adam, "Hey, Adam, take the movies back to the Blockbuster." Adam was jogging back to Blockbuster, and a police officer stopped him. And I had this conversation with Adam when he was probably 13, 14 years old. Do not disrespect the police. Yes, sir, no, sir, all those sort of types of things, because I understand there's a dual standard. Long story short was this. The police officer said to my son that we stop young black men when we see them running because we suspect that they're doing something. That's the type of mentality in a lot of instances that we're dealing with. And this is why we need police reform in this country. Thank you.
I have Richardson. James, but James left. Richardson, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is Tafira Richardson Levy. Shalom.
Shalom.
I'm a resident here of Atlanta, but I've been 40 years in Chicago under the studies of Rabbi Nolan and Rabbi Funay. Shalom to you. And I am now a resident here in Atlanta with Congregation Ora Ami under the studies of Rabbi Shalem Yeshurun. So I've been a long time in this way of life, practicing, studying Torah, keeping law, and all of those things. Everything that I've heard sounds good, really good. I want to agree with one thing that I did hear, and that is what Rabbi Fournier said. Everybody can be a warrior, but everyone don't have to be on the front line.
Correct.
Those that can go out and protest and picket and whatever else they do, those people, that's their spirit. That's what they are able to do. But those people who can't go out and do that or don't feel that spirit to go out and do that can do exactly what Rabbi Fournier said. Put the pen to the paper or get on the phone call and call your Congress people or someone or do something. But anyway, I wanted to make 2 points. My first point is that, well, I want to make 1 point now. My first point is that talking about the police reform and education, I think that if we start with education, that's not really going to help the situation. I think that if you take what you already have in place, it is my understanding that the police department has a pension fund. And every time something happens, the taxpayers have to foot the bill to straighten out whatever the situation is. I think that if the police pension fund is used and tapped for whatever the circumstances are, I think that the police will then begin to police themselves. One another will begin to police one another because they do not want to lose their retirement funds. They do not want to lose their monies, their pocket money. And they will then control one another from within. I also agree with the idea of having a community liaison to oversee what the police are doing, someone that has a voice between the community and the police department. But I really strongly think that one of the things that we should be focusing on is changing the way that the finances are being handled to resolve issues by the police. I think that if the police department the captains and all the way up to the top understood that any incident that happens is going to be taxed through their police pension fund, is going to tap into their dollars, is going to tap into their retirement monies, I think that we will then start seeing some change. The change will then become inside from within. And then we on the outside can then be making changes as well. But until that happens, I don't see any change that's going to take place from the outside, just on the outside alone. That's my opinion. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Rabbi Fune, wait, what was it? Someone else? Rabbi Fune, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say to the young lady, good to see you, Sister Richardson. The city of, I think it's San Francisco, has just, their city council has just voted to defund their police department by X number of dollars and taking some of that money and redirecting it towards trying to correct some of the long-held wrongs in San Francisco or Los Angeles. I think it's Los Angeles. And so it's important when you begin to say, we need to look at the dollars and where the tax dollars are going and how they're being appropriated. And perhaps we need to do some shifting, and the mayor of LA is doing that. The other thing though is, I use the example all the time when I speak to people. Let's use George Floyd. Let's use the young man that was murdered in Georgia a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I posted personally a picture of Mr. Floyd, and I also posted a picture of Dylan Ruth, who went into the church in Charleston, South Carolina, church, and murdered 9 individuals who welcomed him into the church. And I posted that picture because when he was not bruised, he was not thrown to the ground, he was given a bulletproof vest, and he was taken to Burger King to get something to eat. And he just murdered 9 innocent people. It's a mental, the African American community in this country are viewed as the other by many of the police departments throughout this country. They're viewed as the other. On Sunday in Chicago, 2 women drove up to go to the store, and the police were called because they said there were 4 young guys that were acting suspiciously, and they were in a blue car. There were 20 police. They smashed out the windows of these two women, young girls, in the car, snatched them out of the car, threw them on the ground, and with the Floyd thing still hot, one cop put his knee on the neck of one of these women. So it's going to take a lot of retraining or to really restart how police are taught to do policing in our communities. And it does not matter a person's educational level. We've seen people that worked during the, I think he was in the Bush administration, African-American guy, went jogging. He was in a jogging suit and jogging, and what happened? The police stopped him, they harassed him, and so forth and so on. He didn't have all of his ID with him. You don't need an ID. I'm jogging. Point, plain and simple. It is when they start seeing Black people like they see white folk, period. It's
And
not
it's
about being more dangerous. It's about respect.
I'm
This
gonna
is
and
ask,
this is Uriah. Can you hear me?
I'm gonna ask if you're ready to speak. Just raise your hand. So many people. I did hear Uriah. I think someone raised their hand before. What I'm gonna do is go to Uriah, then to Gabrielle, and then back to Rabbi Yehuda, based upon the hands I see. Uriah, go right ahead.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Thank you, Rabbi Afune.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I'm not usually big on words and spotlight and such, but I think something that everyone can do, you know, like right now, something that's practical that you may be able to do, you may be doing, but if not, it can be done potentially is to feel the pain, and what I mean is, I mean sincere pain. You know, and I'll share something that's intimate and personal. So my daughter, many of you have met in the shul, know her, Amari. She's 12 years old. Um, she was speaking to her mom, and she shared with her mom that she agrees with the protesting, and she said, "Tell Dad he has to always be in the car with friends and never by himself." And she cried. So I mean, my daughter's 12 years old. She has to worry about her dad driving down the street and being killed by maybe not even just a police officer, again, who's supposed to protect us, but maybe be killed jogging. I'm a cyclist. I ride my bicycle in my neighborhood. I jog down a trail in my neighborhood. Ahmaud Arbery was killed jogging in his own neighborhood by 3 white males. I don't have to reject the police, even if I comply, as um, as George Floyd was. I can still lose my life. That's pain. When that man was on the ground crying, not necessarily crying, but when he called out to his mama, while this man held his knee on his neck for 8 minutes, I felt pain. I was in my bed. My wife asked me, "Babe, what's going on?" I'm 6'4", 246 pounds. I pride myself on being strong, and I try and usually don't shed tears, so it was different for her. But I cried. That's a pain that some of us may be able to identify with. It's pain that many of us may find it difficult to identify with. But I think once everyone is able to understand that pain that comes with being a Black and a Jew or Black in America, and the years of oppression and white supremacy and racism, what it does to a person, to the family over generations. Once you're able to identify with that pain, then we can really put we can get another effort that we can kind of drive into meeting with officials, having routine meetings with, you know, community meetings, meeting with officials, voting for, you know, trying to get together and collectively decide who's the best candidate that can actually enforce change on what's happening to those that experiencing racism and white supremacy. So, I mean, because I've seen it happen before. Many of these things, it's been happening forever. But for the last few decades, with cell phones and media, we can go look on YouTube right now, and we can go down a line and see African Americans, even children, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Mountain, these are children. So some of us may need to take a look and say, okay, my children are grown. Let me think about my grandchildren. How would I feel if my grandchild was in Walmart and was playing with a BB gun and got shot down? How would that make me feel? I think at that point, when we all can kind of, well, right now, a lot of us have sincere concern, and I respect Rhonda because she asked, what can she do? I feel helpless just like she feels. But I think once we all are able to, we can get past this happening, and then 2 months later it disappears until it happens again. Once if we can feel the pain that many of us as African Americans feel, that feeling, a desire to do something different and invoke change will stick with you for some time period, at least long enough for all of us to decide to get together routinely and talk about what's happening, create some type of action plan, get together with officials in these community meetings and vote for the individuals that can make some change, help some of these, do whatever's necessary, with power and you know, in business and things of that nature, these individuals that have power, if we're able to vote to bring more African Americans that actually have an idea towards making these changes, get them in the office, we need to identify who they are. We all can come together and do that. But I think it starts with feeling that pain and feeling it consistently. If you have to go and watch these YouTube videos for the last decade of people being murdered, that sounds harsh, but we might need to do that so that we can feel what's really happening and be able to consistently have that feeling to want to do something different. I think we all can work together and try to do something that can be meaningful as opposed to just having dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Before I go to Gabrielle real quick, I wanted to ask a quick question, but I really want you to be honest as possible, and this is to everyone. Do you think that we're just dealing with bad police officers, officers that might just be bad individuals who have personal beliefs or bias that work in the police force? Or do you see the entire police force as a form of systematic racism? I want an honest answer. There's no right, wrong. I just want to see where everyone's feeling or see where we are. Are there just bad police? Who
Can
just
I answer that?
or is this, do you really think it's a system within the police overall? Because the police force is very diverse.
Can I answer that?
I mean, anyone can. Asa, go ahead. But if you just give an answer and not so much a long speech so we know where everybody's at.
Absolutely. First, shalom to everybody. To answer your question, no, I don't think that the whole entire police force is completely corrupt. I feel like, you know, first and foremost, you know, there are good cops in the world. My wives and I were having this conversation the other day, and I was explaining that we cannot, you know, create a new narrative that all cops are bad because of certain individuals or certain isolated incidences. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that what happened or what has been happening is okay. It is not. But for the most part, we have to understand that, like Lamar said earlier, there are, you know, and I'm from New York, so I understand there was I want to say about 15 years ago, where they flooded it with so many people getting hired without the proper training. And there are times where there are certain individuals who do have hidden agendas and become police officers because, you know, they have that little man syndrome, and now they got a gun and a badge. Now they feel like they're more than what they really are. So there are incidents like that. But I also do believe that there are good cops. I was watching a YouTube video the other day of a white police officer who got fired for posting his feelings about what happened, and not fired, but he's on administrative leave because he felt like, you know, what the cop did in Minneapolis was complete murder. So we have to understand that there are a lot of cops out there that are doing their job for all the right reasons, that became police officers for the right reasons, and we cannot categorize all police officers to be bad, whether they be black or white or Hispanic or whatever, or Asian, whatever their racial background is, based on certain isolated incidences. And let's not forget that, you know what I mean? So let's continue to support everyone who is standing up for righteousness, first and foremost. And for the ones that are not, then we understand where we stand.
Thank you.
No
Gabrielle, you had your hand earlier, so I want to go to you, Gabrielle. Then Tony, I see you. We'll go to Tony also. Tony, you also want to go, right?
Yeah.
And then Robbie Huda.
Oh, wow. I've been set back. Okay.
Yeah, there's one setback. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
Hey, good evening, everyone. The first thing I just want to start off is with the youngest person to be executed in America, a little boy by the name of George Stinney Jr. George Stinney Jr. You know, he was executed, I think he was like 14, 12, or he might have been even younger. But he was he was around the age of 10 when he was sentenced for execution. Everyone said it was a unfair trial. The boy had tears streaming down his face when he was executed. A little boy, and he was convicted of murdering, 2 little white girls, when he was executed. I couldn't fathom this happening to anybody but an African American. All right. When you look at the picture of the cop, with his knee on the neck, of the gentleman, it's not like the cop was looking down at the person, seeing him as this enemy combatant, who needed to be executed. When I look at the video, I actually don't think the cop killed the guy on purpose. The cop stood on top of his neck the same way you would step on top of a cockroach, in the words of my friend. The same way you would deal with an animal, with a wild animal or a pest. You understand what I'm saying? So I just wanna tease out a couple of things. There is not a hatred towards certain groups of people, in this country because they hate us as human beings. There's a hatred of us because the American psyche, was partly predicated, on the idea that certain groups of people of African descent, namely, are subhuman, right? And this is what Hosea was talking about when he talked about the legacy of racism in America. Racism was part and parcel of what caused America to succeed the way it did. We talk about the works of capitalism and slavery. Capitalism and slavery make that America was not possible. Hello? I'm sorry. I didn't know if anyone was trying to get my attention. But anyway, America would not be possible without the power that free labor gave it. And this free labor could not have happened without the concept of race. And that's one of the things I wanted to tease out. Race is a weapon, a social weapon created, for the purpose of subjugating other people. We have to understand that African Americans were subjugated to perpetual slavery and dehumanization at the time when you had the Declaration of Universal Human Rights, when you had concepts of inalienable rights that swept through Europe and France and caused a whole bunch of revolutions, also led to the American Revolution. Yet at the same time, while you had this concept of inalienable human rights, you also have the concept of perpetual servitude. How do you solve that issue? Well, racism was invented. And I say racism was invented because racism is a contemporary Western phenomenon. And we have to be clear, we have to divorce racism from ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism happened since the beginning of time. Bigotry happened since the beginning of time. All right, since the beginning of time, you always had groups that felt that they were superior to outsiders, right? So you had the Greeks. The Greeks thought that the Europeans or the people north of them were too pale and too slow, but they were courageous in battle, while the Ethiopians were very handsome, but they were timid in battle, but they were very smart. And the Greeks thought they had the perfect combination of the two. All right. We have the word morena. Morena is a word in Spanish meaning dark, right? But it actually means pretty in Spanish because at one time the Moors, ruled Spain. You have parts of Sudan where at one time far in the past, If a Sudanese person was too light, they would rub makeup on their skin to be dark. You know, all these things point to the fact that the idea of beauty was different in different societies, right? The idea was, and beauty was different over here. Some people like light as beauty. Some people like dark as beauty. Some people like long noses as beauty. Some people like slanted eyes as beauty. And we have phenotypical variations throughout all different cultures of the world until the transatlantic slave trade, where we had a rewriting of history. All of a sudden, everything dark is bad. And this has to be understood as different from bigotry. It has to be understood as different from ethnocentrism, which preceded racism. It has to be understood as a completely different and unique dehumanizing phenomenon. Race isn't even a scientific idea. 0.06% of your DNA is what accounts for phenotypical differences in race among individuals. Whereas individuals of different races can actually have more in common with each other genetically. They can have, for example, more in common with people outside of their own race from a genetic standpoint, but at the surface appear to be different races. Race is foolish. Race is a social reality. But race is not a scientific reality, nor is it a reality that is existed since the beginning of the time. It was an idea that was created to dehumanize a different group of people. And that has to be understood, even moving forward, because race is metastasizing. So when we talk about good and bad cops, there's good cops as individuals. Yes, there's good cops as individuals, but it's not a problem of individuals. It's a problem of culture. It's not even just a problem of police culture, and police culture definitely has to change. Public policies definitely has to change. WABE, a politician was talking about the fact that, we need to change the law so we don't need a grand jury to prosecute police officers, where we can have prosecutors, with less overhead, prosecute officers, or the requirement of body cams. All of those things is good. On the social justice side, the social sciences also talk about the fact that education does more to thwart crime than the building of more violent police forces and more private prisons. So
1 more minute, Gabriel.
I'm sorry?
1 more minute.
Yeah, I got you. Public policy needs to change, but the problem of racism is an entirely socialized idea. Just as the officer was conditioned to think of this guy as less than human and stood on top of him as a cockroach. Just as Black people and other ethnic minorities in America are conditioned to see themselves as less perfect, we have to understand that this is a bigger problem than just the police officers, and this is a bigger problem than just hate. And the Sanhedrin saw life as so sacred that before you even killed an animal, right? Certain animals excluded, but like, let's say a ox gored a human being. Masachet Sanhedrin actually called the great Sanhedrin of 71 elders, all right, before even an animal can be killed, can be put down for killing another person. Now when a person's life was at stake, the witnesses were told that, do you know that killing one person, we know this, is as if you killed the entire universe, because from one person the universe was created, and by killing this person, you're affecting untold generations of descendants of that person, and you're causing an entire world to cease to be that would have came out of the loins of a person. We have to deal with the past, and we have to understand the intricacies of the problem and see how they're going forward into the future. Because there's definitely trauma, and just as the sages say that the revelation of Sinai was encoded into the DNA of the children of Israel, and every generation after Sinai have an inherent love of Torah. We have to understand that the sages predated science. Now we understand that science knows that trauma is recorded in the DNA. And we are all victims, black and white, of the collective trauma. And it's dehumanizing to our oppressors, just as it is dehumanizing to the oppressor, just as it is dehumanizing to the oppressed. And the American community does, to borrow the words from Hosea, need to repent, or there will be social fallout, especially after the world is becoming multicultural and what we have, what is emerging to be a post-global, a post-American global order. So that's all I have to say. The Torah is the solution, but I'll speak more on that, later if I ever get a chance.
Thank you, Gabrielle. We appreciate that. Tony, then Rabbi Yehuda, and then I'd like to go to, I think, Rabbi Shalem, who was also.
We're gonna have to wrap up. We're gonna have to wrap up real soon by 8:45.
I'll be very quick. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. Quickly, what concerns me was the 3 officers who basically stood there, did nothing. And that to me is part of that culture of maybe it's that blue line that they're not going to call out their own, even though there were innocent bystanders saying, hey, he can't breathe. Please get off his neck. The officers did nothing, and that's very concerning. And I think that's part of the problem. And I'm not saying all police officers are like that. I hope some would stand up against their fellow police officers if they see them doing wrong, but those 3 men had no soul. What kind of soul would they have if they would hear other people pleading, and even the poor man pleading to breathe, and they did nothing?
And that's why they were rightly arrested.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Rob Yehuda?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I want to agree with Rob Gabriel. He was pointing out to the systemic problem. So while we're pointing at the police officers, you got to think about the penal system. You got to think about the prosecuting system, how they actually give license, because many of these police officers, like I said, what happened with Floyd is just the apex. This is what we're talking about, Floyd, but it's bigger than he's an icon to the problem. All right. So what's happening is police officers have been given the license to kill with impunity. So when you don't have the courts, the penal system in place to enforce the punishment to police officers for what they have done, and over again, just slap them on the wrist, we're going to have this problem. So it's systemic. It is not simply isolated to the police officers. This is a broader thing. And so we can get lost by looking at the tree, the specific tree in the forest, and forget the whole forest may be contaminated with termites. If you're looking at this one tree, it's the whole forest that is an issue. And that's what's happening. We're seeing this whole forest that needs to be burnt down so a new forest can grow stronger. And that is the bigger, that's the problem. It's systemic. So I'm really answering Daweed's question about whether what's going on is just a police officer, whether the good or bad police officer. Peer pressure is a real thing. And since we have peer pressure and courage is another thing. So as an individual officer, you might be a good person, have moral and ethics, behavior, but we know what happens in the crowd. We know what the Talmud says, how people will behave in the crowd. We know what psychologist says about people behaving in the crowd. Would you see the rioters? Many of those people individually would have looted and have done many of those things that you see have done, that were done as a crowd. The same thing with peer pressure and falling into this understanding based on this paradigm in the police department. But again, when we have reform in the penal system, we have reform in the law enforcement, we have reform in the governments of the whole thing, we will eradicate the problem of racism, white supremacy. And I love what was said. Racism is not hatred. It is not prejudice. It is not bigotry. It's a system that's designed to keep a group of people above and to oppress all the people who are not a part of the group of people. That's what racism was created for.
Thank you. I see also, well, the leader teacher and rabbi of Orami. He was mentioned earlier by one of our guests, Rab Shalem. Real quick before we have to go, Rabbi Shalem, do you want to say something?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Shalom, Paul. I apologize for having to leave. My mother was taken to the hospital, but I'm here. I just want to
Rabbi Shalem.
thank everyone for putting this together because it's very important. And I believe, and listening to all that I was able to hear, that it's not an overnight solution, but I agree with Rabbi Kunis, my colleague, that one of the things that we need to do that is imperative is that we show a force that we stand together, that we show our communities, governments, all who would look to see that it's not just about crime against people of African descent, that the crime is against anyone, and we are standing up for justice for everyone, just as we come from diverse backgrounds, that we are standing together to say we will do whatever it takes to change laws, get them changed, do whatever we have to do, but know that you're not just dealing with one particular group of people, that we all stand together in this struggle and for change. So I know that the time is leaving and I don't want to take up the time for anybody else or any closing remarks. I thank you for hearing my voice and listening. And Rabbi Kunis, when we get this together or whenever the plan is, please, that we will stand, Congregation Orami and all of our affiliates will be willing to stand because we are part of Atlanta and we want to be part of a solution. I yield.
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank you. We have only about a couple minutes left. Was there anybody else that needs to say anything before we hand it back over to Rabbi Kunis? I did see someone join recently.
Yes, Kunis.
Me. All right, I'll take it.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for coming. This was very enlightening and inspiring this evening. And your remarks were just taken well to the heart. And this is being recorded. And I'll try to make the recording available on YouTube for anybody who wants to see it. It's a very unusual gathering. I don't think there's anything like it anywhere in the country. I want to end with a prayer for healing. We are at a time where there's so much illness in this country. A pandemic, sickness of fear, isolation, loneliness, and this whole incident of racism that tore at our hearts this past week with George Floyd. So I end with a prayer adapted from the Shemona Esrei. Rafa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafei, heal us, Hashem, heal us, and we shall be healed. Hoshienu v'nei Vasheha, save us, then we shall be saved. Ba'alei refuah shalema l'chol makotenu, bring complete healing to all of our ailments. Ki el melech rofei nemon v'rachaman atah. For you are God, King, faithful, compassionate healer. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Hashem. Rofei cholim, who heals the ill. There's so much illness and sickness in our country. Some of it physical and some of it racism and some of it loneliness and heartbreak. Dear God, we need your help.
Yes, we do.
Spread your light of healing upon us, and together let us all say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again, and thank you, Daweed, for being our moderator.
Pleasure.
I'm going to have to end the session. Normally, I like to allow people the ability to talk, but just too many. Thank you all for coming from near and far, from one end of the country to the other.
Rabbi
Take care, and
Funay,
God
thank you
bless
very much.
And be safe.
Thank you.
Shalom, shalom.
Funay, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
It was recorded. You'll have the recording. It was recorded, and we'll get it uploaded for y'all.
Okay.
Dr. Therese, thank you.
Rav Gabriel. Right, shalom.
Shalom.